This is Metro Focus with Rafael P. Roman, Jack Ford, and Jenna Flanagan. Metro Focus is made possible by Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III, the Peter G. Peterson and Joan Gansconi Fund, Bernard and Denise Schwartz, Barbara Hope Zuckerberg, the Ambrose Monell Foundation, and by
Good evening and welcome to Metro Focus. I'm Rafael P. Roman. It's been a year of fresh starts in City Hall, a new mayor, an overwhelmingly new city council, the most diverse in history, a new council speaker, the first African-American woman to hold that position, and a new minority leader to lead the largest Republican conference in the council in decades. That new Republican leader is Staten Island's Joe Borelli, who joins us now to talk about his new job and about some of the key issues affecting the city, including the recent surge in violent crime and disorder. Councilman Borelli, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Rafael. Appreciate the opportunity.
So, Councilman Borelli, the good news for you is that in the last election, Republicans nearly doubled the number of members you had in the city council. The not so good news is that you still only have 5 members in a 51-member body. What kind of clout will you really have with 5 members? And as the new minority leader, how will you be wielding that clout?
Well, Rafael, let's start here. This is good for the public in general. When we think about New York City, we think of it, of course, as the largest city in the country, but we should be thinking of it as a small country. We are the same population of a country like Switzerland. We actually spend about $100 billion more. So it's in the public's interest, it's in every New Yorker's interest not to have one party rule, to have a vibrant opposition, to have a vibrant debate on thought and policy and questions that arrive. There should be more than one voice chiming in. So we do have the most members we've had in about 2 decades, which is a good thing. You're right. Look, the numbers are the numbers. We still only make up about 10% of the council itself. But the reality is most of the fault lines on the city council involve moderates versus progressive. And we are certainly part of that moderate bloc. Some would call us the common sense caucus. And when you talk about any issue from housing issues to environmental issues, you see just this general breakdown of members on, across the spectrum, but in terms of moderate versus sort of the far left.
Now you have a new caucus called the Common Sense Caucus, which some wag might say is probably the smallest caucus in the city council, but I won't say that because I respect all of you guys. What is that? I think you co-chair it with Democrat, Robert Holden from Bob Holden from Queens. Who's in that caucus, and what do you hope to accomplish with it?
Look, we're certainly right now recruiting some of the new members. We think we'll have at least 10, maybe 11, maybe 12. But again, it's a block of votes. In this case, it would be 20% of the council, but it's a block of votes for people who want the city to return to focusing on regular quality of life problems, focused on the questions of how our garbage gets picked up, whether our streets are paved, whether our litter is getting removed, whether the grass is cut in the parks, all of the things that actually fall within the wheelhouse of city government that tend to get, play second fiddle, essentially, when you talk to some of our new members and some of our other members who seem to want to make the city council a place of social justice and progressive bona fides.
Okay, so let's get to the issues. Late last year, you wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Post blasting a vote that was about to take place, and which in fact did take place, a vote on a bill to allow nearly 800,000 non-American citizens who are documented to vote in local elections. The vote passed. Can you summarize for us the arguments that you have against that measure?
Well, sure. First of all, when you talk about the issue itself, when you talk about the policy, whether it's good or bad, the appropriate venue for having this discussion is in the state legislature, because what we did in the city council is specifically prohibited by both the state constitution Constitution and state election law. The state constitution cites that every citizen should have the right to vote, and state election law cites that only people who are citizens of the United States can vote in any city, town, village, or county election within New York State. So it's not vague. The advocates are trying to paint this as some sort of a vagueness in state law, but it's actually crystal clear. It's so crystal clear that Mayor de Blasio had the same opinion as Joe Borelli on the legality for 7 years and about 10 months of his mayoralty, as did Mayor Bloomberg and all sort of the mayors and corporation councils before. So we are challenging this in court. Why it should make New Yorkers afraid is that if the city council is willing to just go around and directly violate state law on this matter, then they could violate state law on any matter. Unfortunately, for some of my colleagues, we in the city council have to follow the statutes of the state of New York. We have to follow the state constitution. We simply disregarded it in this regard. And I think we'll be successful in state Supreme Court. And I think we might even be successful at the Board of Elections level, because the Board of Elections is required to follow state law and the state constitution as well. And clearly now we have a conflict. And clearly, as in all cases, state statute and state constitutional law takes precedent over our city administrative code.
Well, the supporters, of course, argue that these documented legal non-citizens pay taxes, they use the same services, they suffer the same consequences for bad political leaders' decisions. So they have skin in the game, and they should have a say in what happens. But regardless of that, 2020 was surprisingly good year for election for Republicans. The presidential election got more Hispanic votes than expected, and many local elections, particularly on the southern border, did as well. A lot of pundits are saying that this is a sign that the Hispanic community in the United States is tracking like the more traditional immigrant communities, from liberal to conservative, from Democrat to Republican. Are you concerned that by fighting this so hard as you're fighting it hard, that you may lose a lot of the Hispanics, which are the lion's share of those 800,000 votes, when it comes to the next election and the one after that?
No, I'm not terribly concerned. And if we could just dilute some of the argument you made, number one, these aren't non-citizens, they're foreign citizens. These are people who, as you pointed out, are here legally. And as a result of that, they're often in compliance with the laws of their native country or the country where they were previously a resident of. So they're not non-citizens without the ability to vote anywhere. And one of the things I've been pointing out is that a citizen of the UK could have voted for London Mayor Sadiq Khan and Mayor Eric Adams within about 35 days of each other, which to me is kind of strange. These people have skin in the game. There's no question about that. But the United States has never used tax paying as a standard for voting. In fact, I think most of us would agree that that's probably a pretty bad standard to have, whether someone has to pay taxes. But if you use tax paying as the new standard, then why aren't stockbrokers who live in Greenwich, Connecticut? Why aren't they able to vote in city elections if they work on Wall Street and pay taxes here? Why do we not allow even teachers, for argument's sake, who live in New Jersey and might commute to Manhattan to vote in municipal elections? Because residency is required, but also, again, the same statute, New York State Election Law, Section 2-105, 5-102, the same statute that requires a 30-day residency for citizens also requires citizenship. So the argument is less about whether people have skin in the game, because the truth of the matter is even tourists have skin in the game. Tourists pay hotel occupancy tax. Tourists pay sales tax. And the standard of taxpayer as for suffrage purposes is probably not a direction that Democrats want to go down.
Okay, so let's turn to the issue that's in the headlines, of course, and has been. That's the rise in violent crime and disorder that's plagued New York City, as it has many big cities, or many cities across the country over the past couple of years. It's a reality that was made all the more palpable since the beginning of the year by the killing of 19-year-old Crystal Byron Nieves in a Bronx McDonald's and a 40-year-old Michelle Go in the Times Square subway station just a few days ago. Most agree that Mayor Adams was elected chiefly because of his promise to fight crime and to reverse the trend. Do you have confidence that he can do that? And what are some of the things that he needs to do from your point of view to do that reversal?
Look, I do take the mayor at his word, and I am optimistic on Eric Adams in his crusade to save New York and save public safety in New York. And let's talk for a second about how he got elected. And I think you're right. You know, there's a lot of New Yorkers that want a proactive police department, and there's a lot of New Yorkers that want a responsible police department that doesn't harass or assault the public. And for Eric Adams's benefit, the overwhelming majority of New Yorkers fit both of those categories. And I think he spoke to them. Too often in Democratic primaries, you only heard one side of that equation and not the other. And I think the voters returned the favor to Eric Adams by electing him mayor. The problem is, even if Eric Adams wants to have a more proactive police department, and I think he's done that with the return of sort of an anti-crime plainclothes units off the bat, is if we have people like Alvin Bragg who are just not going to prosecute people for some serious crimes, or we have them materially altering documents, I mean, the charging documents, in the case of a TJ Maxx just 2 weeks ago, then all the work the police can do is going to be moot. If we still have laws like bail reform that allows people to be perennially charged and released on their own recognizance for, again, sometimes serious crimes. There's a myth that people are on Rikers Island for marijuana or low-level crimes. It's just not true, okay? And we have to be honest about that with the public. When we have policies like bail reform, when we have DAs like Alvin Bragg, I think that undermines a lot of the reason why New Yorkers elected Mayor Adams.
Well, you know, DA Bragg has been a state and a federal prosecutor for years, and he actually campaigned on the issues that he outlined in his now famous memo, Day One memo, where he enumerated the changes that he wanted to make, and he says that he's been misunderstood in a lot of ways from that memo. You know, his basic argument, as is the argument of some criminal justice reform advocates, is that you cannot incarcerate us out of crime and out of this crime surge, because what happens is that you create all kinds of dislocation by this massive incarceration. You create these dislocations, economic and social, that are irreversible, that lead to more crime, and that happen mostly in minority communities. How do you respond?
But we've always had progressive DAs in New York City, in the 5 boroughs, who wanted to limit the number of people that were incarcerated. There's nothing wrong with that. We've always had DAs who wanted to reduce the number of people who were sentenced to jail. We've always had that. The difference is, while those DAs looked at the individual and the crime and the facts and circumstances and the rap sheet of the individual, this DA, Alvin Bragg, has decided we're going to do that as a blanket. We're going to proactively tell our ADAs to not prosecute some crime. I mean, I think this one incident that happened, I think it was January 5th, at a TJ robbed the store, used some type of shears or scissors to threaten the staff. We had an ADA acting under Alvin Bragg's policy of materially altering the facts of that case and asking a police officer to sign a document. Put it to you this way. What if that was done in the opposite? What if an ADA changed the charging documents to add a weapon that wasn't there? That DA would be charged with prosecutorial misconduct and would be subject to civil and criminal penalties. This is the same thing just happening in reverse. That's where we should draw a line with someone like Alvin Bragg. We want prosecutors, we want ADAs to look at the facts, look at the cases, and act with reasonableness. We don't want to have blanket get out of jail cards.
Right. Well, that's one case. To be fair, that's one case, and it was not the DA himself. But we only have 30 seconds left, and I have to ask you this quickly. Most political experts are predicting a good midterm election for Republicans across the country. How are Republicans going to do in New York State and New York City, and at the midterm and beyond the midterm?
I think you'll see some surprises, especially from Lee Zeldin around the state. I think he's going to be very competitive in the suburbs, in Nassau County, in Suffolk County, where he lives, in Westchester, and the lower Hudson Valley. If we could pick up those areas, I think we have a good shot at the governor's mansion, and certainly good shots at picking up Senate seats.
All right. Well, Councilman, we have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be talking in the future, I'm sure.
Thanks.